Good morning and welcome to day 5 of Streaming Media West Connect 2021. I'm Eric Schumacher Rasmussen. I'm the editor and VP of Streaming Media and the conference chair for all of our online and someday again in-person events. Speaking of which, we are planning Streaming Media East in Boston for 2022, May 24th and 25th to be exact. Take a look at streamingmedia.com/East for more information. If you're signed up for our newsletters, you'll be getting more information about that as well, along with another Streaming Media Connect scheduled for February. The call for speakers will be going out soon for both of those events. So if you're interested in speaking, joining a panel, making a presentation at either of those events, that's how you can do that. You can also contact me directly if you want more information. Before we discuss or kick off our discussion about how the hybrid office is affecting enterprise streaming, I'd like to just go through a few housekeeping notes. If you have questions for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A rather than the chat. The chat is open, but I can't guarantee that our moderator will see your questions if they are there. So if you put them in the Q&A, the moderator or I will make sure that they get posed to the panelists. If we run out of time before we get to all the audience questions, we'll save those questions, send them to our panelists, and they will hopefully be able to answer some of them offline after the event's over. Also, live transcripts are turned on. If you want to turn off those transcripts, you go to the bottom of your Zoom window, click on Live Transcripts, and select Disable Subtitles. Finally, just for being here, everyone in the audience is entered into a drawing for a $50 Amazon gift card, but there's a catch. You must be present to win. We'll be announcing the winner of that gift card at the end of the discussion. I'd like to thank our diamond sponsors who've been sponsoring all of our sessions this week. That's Conviva, Limelight Network, Signient, and Video Guys. And we have brief video messages from each of them now. I'll ask our producer, Bill, to roll it.
In this era of streaming video, we are pioneers, helping make your stories more vibrant. Conviva lives in billions of apps on devices all over the world, measuring trillions of data points each day to provide real-time insights for your content, ads, and social. Conviva. Every stream, every screen, every second.
VideoGuys.com is your source for live production gear, and we can help you start streaming today.
Reach a wider audience and tell your story using equipment like the RGB Link Mini family of 4 HDMI mixers, YOLO Live YOLO Box all-in-one touchscreen mixers, streamers, and recorders, and PTZ cameras and controllers, perfect for productions of all sizes without a large production crew.
Go to VideoGuys.com or call us at 800-323-2325 for help and start streaming today.
I would also like to thank the sponsor of this panel, NewTek, and NewTek's Chris Burgos is going to be one of our panelists talking about the hybrid office and enterprise streaming. And one thing I've learned this week is that if you want to start a debate, put the word hybrid in the title of any panel, because we all have different definitions of what a hybrid office is, what a hybrid event is, what a hybrid production is. And I know that our panelists are going to talk about those issues and more. So with that, let me get out of the way and welcome our moderator, Andy Howard, and our panelists. Andy, how are you?
I'm good, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Good. Thanks for joining. I will let you introduce the panelists and kick off the discussion.
All right. I'm just going to Well, I don't even need to share my screen for this. So I'm Andy Howard. I'm the founder and managing director of Howard and Associates. We're a consulting company that helps organizations implement video communications. So predominantly video streaming, video conferencing, digital signage, things along those natures. We have an all-star cast here today. Dan Sweeney from LinkedIn. We have Chris Burgos from New Tech, who is also our sponsor. Thank you, Chris. And Melissa Dale from Deloitte. So I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves now. And Dan, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Good morning. I got to try and match Chris's smile at 6. It was 7 o'clock here in California. You guys can maybe watch the sunrise behind me, although it's a little foggy. But good morning, all. Apologies for, because we're all techies here. I've got at least 3 different color temperatures of lights going on, but you just have to listen to what I say. What I say will have some value, even if what you're looking at is slightly confusing. But I'm over at LinkedIn. Our team manages a huge number of both internal and external production and streaming. And then we also have good old LinkedIn, or good old new LinkedIn Live, which a lot of you will hopefully be seeing and be using. So our team goes around the globe, and we touch hybrid, and we've always had a finger into hybrid in terms of folks at home and on site. So I'll hand it over to Chris.
Thanks, Dan, for trying to match the energy. I totally understand. You didn't also explain, as we're talking about this concept of hybrid, you're in the middle of transitioning yourself right now, literally locations. So, you know, the beat goes on. This is the beauty of hybrid, is that I don't actually have to be in the office. Hey, I'm Chris Burgos with New Tech. We do all kinds of great stuff. We produce the TriCaster, which is an amazing piece of technology. We'll get into that. And we also have been a big hand and part of NDI and its sort of proliferation. And it is certainly helping these hybrid environments a lot. And I hope to sort of teach a little bit, as well as talk about just like the real world of how this stuff gets deployed. And I'll pass it over to Melissa.
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Dale, and I am from Deloitte, and my team leads both in the US and globally our live streaming operations. In addition to that, we have a pretty large hand and influence into the future of hybrid work for the US firms. So certainly a very hot topic right now, and we're all 100% on board that there is no true definition of hybrid. It all depends on who you ask and when. So I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation. Thank you for having me.
Great. Okay, I'm going to we're not going to have a lot of slides here, but I just wanted to put up one as sort of agenda slide to help set the stage for what we're going to talk about today. Because as Eric mentioned, I think all of us have seen that, oh, sorry, I got to presenter mode. The definition of hybrid means different things to different people. So I think we tried to boil it down to what are the 2 main things here. And the first is hybrid presenters. So you want to be able to bring presenters in from anywhere in the world, really. And then the second is hybrid viewers. So typically workers were in the office in the past. Now many of them are home or working remotely. And how do we reach those people effectively? And then, so we'll talk a little bit about the production. We'll talk about the management, and as well as the distribution of the video streams and how the different office environments are going to affect that. And then talk about kind of our thoughts about where we think this is going to go into the future. And then we should have plenty of time for Q&A. So please enter your questions in the Q&A, and we'll go from there. So in terms of the production, I don't think there's anybody more qualified to talk about this than Chris with New Tech. So I'll let you start us off with some of your thoughts on how have things changed over the past year and a half within New Tech and within your customer base, and we'll start off there.
Yeah, this has been. New Tech has certainly acquired a lot of new customers in the last year, and all of that is off the backs of what we've been doing in IP. And that's the big name in town. That's the big game you have to be playing. And we talked about this a little bit in our pre-call, Andy, but IP infrastructure is now the thing everyone's looking at because everyone's home. You got to get people from all around the globe. I mean, everyone on this call, no one's around the corner from each other. You know, I'm out in New Jersey, you know, Dan's out in California. Like there's a lot of different things going on. And how do we produce this in a way that's effective? And basically in sort of the middle of last year, we released this very easy to use tool in Live Call Connect that says, hey, you're going to have people on a Zoom, you're going to have people on a Teams call, and we don't want to make that production as easy as possible. And we really did a good job highlighting this with Tissue Tech, which is a case study we produced early last month, and just discussing like, hey, these guys have to do a hybrid production where people are at home, and none of this is necessarily brand new. I think, you know, we're all kind of tech savvy people on this call, so there's been a lot of ways to go after this problem. There's lots of pieces of technology you can get involved. I mean, certainly we've been doing satellite and broadcast for forever, but what is cost effective and also what's easy for the end user to use? Zoom is the new language. Teams is the new language. People feel comfortable working with these applications regardless of skill level. And so at New Tech, we really wanted to sort of solve that very inherent problem. You can make a better tool for this stuff, but as that complexity increases, you're going to start to push people away. You want people to just speak a language they normally speak, which is, I know how to get Zoom on my device, you know, that's on a phone, that's on a tablet. And then with Live Call Connect, we can just say, hey, look, you be as normal you as possible, and we will do all the heavy lifting in our production. And that's really what New Tech has capitalized on in terms of we are now sort of helping define a lot of these workflows. There have been all the tools in the space, but just the ease of use of saying, get on the Zoom call like we're on right now and let Live Call Connect do the heavy lifting is just a godsend, in my opinion. With just 2 button presses, I've solved my production workload for that piece. And then we talk about NDI, but, you know, before I sort of get off this topic, I'm using NDI right now in the Zoom call. I have an NDI camera, so I'm not using a traditional web camera. I'm going into a system that's producing an NDI signal, and it's sort of, you know, me on a green screen, and you know, I'm doing all of this. I live, breathe, and die that sort of NDI IP workflow. It really is opening up a lot of doors, depending on the multitude of factors that happen in these hybrid environments.
Great, and I think you can see that this is a perfect example of talking about remote production, right? We have people scattered throughout the United States. I'm in Connecticut, Melissa's in Houston, Eric's up in Wisconsin, we got Dan on the West Coast. So that's great. Dan, why don't you talk about a little bit about how things have changed within your environment?
Sure. So I think it's been a change of levels. So we've always had all these different elements. It's just sort of where some things have gone up, some things have gone down. So we shifted quickly to virtual production at first, very simply, almost like a Zoom webinar. At the time, we were using Blue Jeans and their tool to do some of our internal things that needed to be secure. And also on the production side, we're going down the IP track with Grass Valley and AMP. And we also use, like, for the bulk of our shows, we're using StreamYard for the quick shows. Like something like this would probably be on StreamYard because it's 4 to 6 folks. We're able to put out a large number of events that way. And then on the streaming side, we have a dedicated team to that now, where before we had one team that did production and streaming and all these different pieces. Now we have a team, and I see Chris is on here watching, so I'll say very nice things about it, which is pretty easy because it's awesome. There's a team called Streamforce that just concentrates on streaming. That's internal, and that's all these external customers that we work with now for LinkedIn Live. And so the overall industry has kicked up. All those events that were on-prem suddenly needed to go somewhere. So now there's things like LinkedIn events and lots of other platforms, all these other platforms that have ballooned up to fill that gap. So we're seeing all those levels go up while we've dialed back, obviously, the on-site work. We're not building stages. We are not running out to event spaces and spending days setting all those things up. We don't have these huge video villages that we're setting up. So the nature of the work has shifted, but the amount of work has increased. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Melissa, I know that Deloitte at one point sent, everybody went remote. So how did you guys pivot very quickly to be able to enable that for you and keep the communications, which obviously needed to happen, going at Deloitte?
No, that's a really good question. So we basically flipped the firm to fully remote, both US and globally, in 48 hours. And during a time when information was both spread all over the place, all over the internet, the firm needed to have a very solid, secure way of delivering its messages to very large audiences. But a bigger piece of that was, how are we going to get our responses back from people that are watching? While some of these messages needed to be one-to-many, we needed a way of downsizing that into bite-sized collaborative conversations. So, using a number of platforms that were readily available to us, we, jumped in some of those bandwagons to say, okay, let's roll this technology out firm-wide and let's get these messages out. Utilizing tools like Zoom, like Teams, using those, taking webcams essentially and turning them into our video intake and pushing those through our larger platforms, which is what a lot of people were doing, but something that we would have frowned upon, 6 months before that, right? My God, using your webcam, we can't do that. But we had to. There was no option, and we essentially turned, CEOs all over the U.S. and all over the world. We turned their home offices into small production studios, and used that as our method to get the messages out as quickly as possible. And it was bumpy. We were talking during our pre-call, having to tell CEOs, I need your kid to stop streaming right now because I need every ounce of bandwidth you have. ISPs all over the country were needing to figure this out as well. And what we learned is that we had to release a lot of control. As we all know in this industry, we want to control every single possible variable we can, light, sound, any sort of interaction. And we had to lose all of that, yet be held to the same standards that we had previously of rock solid, rock star production value. And so it was a tough couple of months, but my team did an incredible job of learning from each of those hiccups and leveraging our partners, our partnerships with vendors such as NewTek to get on board what we needed to make this experience as consistent as possible. Hopefully that answered your question.
No, that's great. Yeah, and sometimes you have dogs going crazy in the background too, so that you have to deal with.
Andy, that's a good point, though. I mean, I think one of the things that we kind of took away in all of our respective positions is the environment also humanized a lot of this stuff. Like, yeah. we in a production environment aim for this sort of ultra high standard of just like perfection and precision timing and clocking, all the stuff, which is like this is a human endeavor. Like, there are people at home, they have kids, they have parents, they're taking care of stuff. We have pets. We have, I'm in an apartment, sometimes my neighbor's having a bad day and I got to give a demo still. I turn on the camera every time. But I think this, if anything, has humanized a lot of these productions in a way that maybe we were afraid to do for a while. And this very like, well, we have to be video professionals and this is the delivery mechanism and everything aims for this ultra high broadcast marks. I mean, all the points are still there, but the truth is, we now have that real democratized video in this way that we never thought would happen, because it's just the environment. Like Melissa said, now it's, it is trying to tell somebody, hey, can if it would be possible if your kid could stop streaming to Twitch just for the hour and then, make it back, we'll figure it back out. But that's a real human issue. Like, now that is something that we didn't consider before because it wasn't as a necessity. And now we're here. And I actually like that, because it is sort of the, maybe a little high-minded, but it is the beauty in all this, is that like, hey, everyone's really at home trying to make this happen. And it is a person just like you. I think the video broadcast industry often had that high professional watermark. And now you can say, well, I've watched this thing happen. I've watched my boss be on a call. I could be on a call. Like those fears are maybe sort of lowered significantly because it's just turning on the webcam and, the professionals in the back scenes will do the rest of the heavy lifting.
Yeah, I mean, we felt, or at least I felt, like there is permission given by the industry when you start watching, your CNNs or your MSNBCs or your Fox News, whichever way you're going, and you see that that's what they're doing there, or you're watching the NFL draft, or you're any of these things. So the norm changed, the expectation changed, and by that came the permission for all these things that we knew we could do in the background. You could. I mean, we knew we could bring a Blue Jeans or a Teams or a Zoom into a show. I'm not sure we ever did, but you knew you could in a roundabout way. Now there's much better ways with NDI and the like, but you knew you could, but other people weren't doing it, or you didn't, or people could come into the studio, so you would bring them in, or you could bring that camera to them. So these things that you could do before, suddenly you had this permission to do it, and the expectation and sort of this authority because everybody was doing it. And what I found from it was, there's the cliche that, content is king, but that's kind of what it was proving out. People didn't have to be perfectly lit in a studio. The content, what they were talking about, people cared about. And it also set up where these conversations like we're having now could be all virtual, and you suddenly weren't limited on the pool of people that you could talk to. You didn't have to fly everybody into New York or fly everybody into San Francisco. You could suddenly pull folks in. So we started seeing, we would get higher level, if you will, like celebrity or talent or people with a much better knowledge of content than we would have before, because we didn't have all those logistics to overcome. So there are these benefits for the viewer that came with it. Sure, maybe the sound, they didn't sound quite as good, or maybe you could hear the dog barking, or maybe the lights off, but what they were talking about was perhaps more relevant than the folks you were able to get before. So it's interesting what the norm has become, because Melissa, as you were talking about the team, working over 48 hours, I was conveniently on paternity leave during the start of all this. So the team and my sister teams and the other teams at LinkedIn were furiously trying to figure all these things out. I walked back in probably a couple of weeks after it started, and there were, a lot of things had already been implemented very well and very quickly. But I've almost forgotten how much work went in, mostly because I wasn't there figuring it out. But I know a lot of people were scrambling and working really, really hard to make this our new norm. Now we don't think twice about doing what we're doing. But back then it was a scramble. How are we going to do this? What are the expectations set? Everyone's going to be on home internet. That's terrifying. Knock on wood, we haven't really had many issues with that. We've even done a shoot. It was actually a recording, but it's like a live recording from a celebrity who was on a yacht off of Miami. And so before we said absolutely not, that cannot happen. That will not happen. That's not a thing. But now, okay, sure, let's give it a shot. And it worked. So
I think too, Dan, is that it, in essence, at least for us, pre-pandemic, to do a live streaming event was limited to the CEOs of the firm. It was very much a nice to have, and everyone else did, audio casts and your traditional large kind of conference calls. But when it came down to really humanizing what we did, it became attainable. It became something that everybody had access to. And some of our, not CEO level leaders, but those up and coming leaders now are in a position where they are giving these addresses live and in person and from home to audiences where were previously limited to a conference call. And I think that is one of the benefits of what happened, is that it gave exposure to the work that we do to an audience who would have thought, I could never do that.
So where do we think that we're going from here? Eric, I've told you this. I was really looking forward to going out to Huntington Beach to do this streaming media in person this year. But the online has been great. Do we think that it's going to sort of go back to the old way of doing things when people return to an office and, you can go back into an auditorium and you can do things like that? Or do we think we're still going to predominantly have this sort of remote production environment going on? What do you think? Or Dan, go ahead.
Sure. I mean, we're seeing a little bit of it now. I mean, we've had a couple false starts in terms of just going back in the office, but at LinkedIn in general, it's been a fair amount of people now starting to go back into the office. So the office for us would be Bay Area predominantly. So we're starting to see and I was actually surprised at how much just the office in terms of going back in, the normal was there where people were slotting back in. I mean, you're wearing masks, you're doing all these different things, but there's definitely a group of folks who appreciate being present in the office for their work. I could see that carrying over to be present for conversations and having discussions and streaming that. It will be both, right? So now we have the ability to bring in, so in the past where we did everything on site and now that we're doing everything virtual, it will be both, and it'll be figuring out how to tie those two together. So I do see it. I think it's just all about degrees again, how much of a mix, and it may be different between companies. It may be different between the kind of shows that we're doing. Our internal things, we may have a fair amount of people that come in because they want to meet their coworker and talk. Our virtual shows, our external facing ones, may well still be a much larger remote audience, which it always was. Like our shows that we would do in Vegas, you'd have whatever we had there, 1,000 people, 2,000, whatever the number was there, and we'd have multiples of that watching the stream. So the conversation, which I'm sure is where you're going with this, is, well, how do you address both with the same content that's going out there? And that's the challenge that we're facing now. How do we think about what people are, how they're going to take the information, but also should everybody get the same information? Do you have to, some people would have chat because they're online. Other people are going to have the benefit of talking to the person next to them. Those are both benefits. I don't see that one like excludes the other. It's just kind of tailoring your content to those different audiences. So I do see it as a mix. And I think if I was a betting man, I would think it's actually going to go further on site than I would have thought. I didn't think it would, but I'm starting to see that. Because if I could drive the 4 miles to Huntington to go to Stream Media West, it's not quite as long a trip as yours, but I would, because I get to hang out with you guys and actually have a conversation and grab a meal and all those other pieces. So I do see it as straying a little further than I originally thought. At first, I thought the world's completely changed. We're all staying at home forever. We're never going back in. So I guess I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get back.
I don't think you're in the wrong space either, Dan. I think I see this a lot too. A lot of people want to clamoring. It's just human nature. Like, we are communal by nature. This is like, I'm on a call of people who think and do and speak similarly to the stuff that I want. And I want to like chill with you guys, in a very human way. Yeah, that transition is happening fast. I think the future, I look at how are the tech companies pivoting in this space? Not just new tech, but people we work with. There has been competitive features being developed on Zoom and Teams, as those guys were at one point competing, and now I feel like those two have sort of diverged in their grasp. So now we have two sort of different platforms doing different things. But I keep looking at all the way these technologies are trying to make these experiences more relatable, whether it's Q&As or whether it's raising your hand or in ways to impact your piece of the video feed to have some sort of contribution. I have a slightly different background in that I've done a lot of work in esports. And in those environments, we had hybrid environments. We had a large portion, the significant portion of our audience was at home. And so it was something as easy as, hey, somebody tweeted about one of our players, showcasing that, highlighting that. That viewer engagement needs to happen on both sides. So I look at what those guys have been doing for the past 4 years and say, we need to be engaging the audience as much as we can. And that is highlighting what they're saying in text, that is highlighting and having a microphone in the room, that is sort of engaging that and looking at it in this weird way, almost like the sporting events do, of saying like, well, how do we tackle this environment? Because those guys have to do it and have had to been doing it prior to the current environment. And then just speaking to, putting my new tech hat back on, I mean, we are trying right now, as of yesterday, we released our bridge protocol. NDI Bridge basically says you can take 2 offices on either side of the country and make these guys local NDI. And if you're not used to NDI, it says if I put something on my network, I can do video, audio, and control over it. I can control my camera. Well, now I can do that over the wide area network. So me and Dan can interface with each other, and everything that Dan touches in his office, as easy as all the cameras are in his facility, he can also access my stuff in my apartment in New Jersey. And so just like that ease of use is like opening up production doors. We were talking about production and different layers of this stuff. So the production technology is evolving very quickly. There are a lot of people in the IP space who are innovating much faster than we would expect. And, that's the beauty of doing things in code right? I'm not worried about some of the major issues that we have in actual physical production, that is supply chains and things like that. So those guys are going to be leading the charge. And we already know that because when we went, to everyone's point, when we went to doing these remote events, we all had a tool that we were ready to use. Like Zoom didn't come out of nowhere. It didn't start, in March of last year. It's been going on for a while, and we've all been keeping our eyes, and we have a couple of tools that we're highlighting. I think that's going to continue to grow, but I do entirely recognize Dan's point of a lot of people just want to have those in-person meetings. And the beauty of the hybrid environment is going to be, I don't have to attend physically every event if I can't. I no longer have to be as picky and choosy as I was, because if I'm introducing a panel somewhere, once I'm done with that panel, I can turn my phone on and be watching the other event that I really wanted to go to, but like I had this conflict. When you guys are in Boston, I would love, I was just thinking about that. I'm like, man, I wonder how the schedules are going to line up. And that's always a thing where when you're doing so much of this stuff, you can't always get it to everything you want to do, but now you can. There's a hybrid angle. You won't get that community aspect right away, but you certainly will be part of that event and learn something. And then 3 months down the road, if I go out to Cali, I can see Dan and pick things up and say, hey, this is how things have progressed since we last talked, or still last heard you talking about this stuff. So it is becoming the community that once was, we thought of how small and tight knit the people we once knew were, whether they were a part of our team or our families or, friends. It's a lot larger, a lot faster. And I think this is very real for younger generations. Everyone's now experiencing this, the technology enabling you to have this very wide community.
But let's not lose sight of the financial gains from a business perspective of people not traveling for almost 2 years. And, speaking as someone from business, not necessarily industry, I have a very, very vested interest in making sure that I am providing a service to Deloitte that is going to maintain as much benefit of hybrid and collaboration and connection with our clients that can happen without having to be at a client site. And while, I agree with Dan, there is absolutely value in that conversation of when do I need to be there and when do I not. If we can't make hybrid successfully work in the day-to-day business world, then I start to lose those people to, I'm going to benefit if I'm there live. So from a technology perspective, it's in our interest, in my team's interest, and my leader's interest to make sure that our technology is not just easy to use, easy to understand, but that our clients are really seeing value in why we're investing in this direction, so that in the end, we're still staying profitable and, maintaining as many people not traveling as possible.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be the need to travel and be in person, but there's many things you can do without the need for that. So it's kind of, where people used to travel for everything, then we didn't travel at all, and now it's probably, there's going to be some sort of happy medium. But we got a bunch of questions coming in really about interactivity. So one of the things, in sort of the history of streaming is that it was, in order to reach a large audience, it was usually you had the speaker and they were delivering the presentation, and people could maybe chat in at best to get, to participate in that session. What do we see in the direction of potentially having it be more interactive, where, for example, on this session, people could call in via video and ask a question over video? So, that kind of speaks to how important is the latency to the end user and things like that. So what are people's thoughts about that? I know Melissa and I were together this week talking about this very thing where, it doesn't have to be a huge event either. It can be maybe 50 people local and 50 people remote. How do you provide that interactivity between those two groups? So what are people's thoughts about that?
I've used my interactive hand just in case that helps.
Did you raise your hand?
Yes.
But go ahead, Melissa. I'll jump in after.
Okay, thank you. Well, I would say that at least for our specific team, it put us in a position to influence content and conversation and the layout of how the program was going to be delivered in a way that we hadn't really been asked before. What we did pre-pandemic was pretty much, we were almost treated like the catering. Conversations were had months and weeks in advance, and it's like, oh, did we get a room? Check. Did we schedule the streaming team? Check. Did we send the catering order to the caterers? Now it's truly a requirement for people to include us much further along in the conversation to understand what are the true outcomes and goals of why you're wanting to connect. And that's going to help influence how we produce your program. For someone to say, well, we want everyone to really get to know each other, so we want to do a webinar for 5,000 people. Okay, if that's your objective, we probably need to think about the format a little differently. And so, I think the direction that Dan was going was, we are truly trying to now tailor the technology to help produce the outcomes of what our clients are looking for.
It's interesting you bring up that sort of being at the table. We would certainly have some events where we were at the table and others that we felt like we weren't before. Now, definitely at the table. The other interesting part that's come out is those marketing folks and those event people have also now decided, oh, that's a pretty neat thing. We should start looking into what. So we've actually had teams within LinkedIn grow their knowledge base and their expertise into not quite the streaming space, but the sort of virtual event space, if you will, in terms of what kind of platforms are out there, how do they shift what were sort of traditional work around brand and design to shift it to online. Like everybody's come into that space where we've all been for a while. So it's been neat to be able to share with them, hey, here's some of the things you can do, and try and find that line. So we feel like our ranks have swollen as well, in terms of we suddenly have more resources and more folks that get it now. They're kind of forced to, because the energy can't go into the registration booth as people are coming in, like sort of shifting these resources into, well, how can we do a better job of registering people and reminding people to come watch the virtual event? And just like you talked about, how do we allow folks to talk to each other? So we looked at a number of different platforms, some of which do allow that, right? Like Zoom has breakout rooms, but other things you can actually just one-on-one have conversations. So we've been able to get more resources focused on it. And then someone talked about the latency of bringing folks in, and we've been struggling with that too. So with Zoom, you can do it, but with other platforms where you're using traditional streaming, you've got that 20, 30 plus second delay. How do you give folks? So we end up having to kind of give people we know are going to ask questions. We sort of preset those. Their questions are theirs, but we know these 10 people are going to come in. They're actually watching. If we're using Zoom, they're watching a separate Zoom. So we have a couple of Zooms going on. If we're using Teams, same concept. But it's not all the way there. At least the tools that we have access to right now don't allow us to go all the way there. But that would be nice. Like right now, if these questions, which they could on Zoom webinar, come straight in and you ask the question, you do obviously add another layer. Now you're saying, okay, who's going to manage that? Who's going to be that person that checks their audio and their video and their content and what they're going to ask? So yeah, there's still work to be done, right? We're a couple of years into this, but there's still things to think about. And what's nice about conversations like this is finding out new ways of doing things, because I've been out of the loop a little bit on the NDI thing. So it's neat to see that. It's great to hear from you, Melissa, about the kind of things that you guys are working on, so that we can, because I'm already finding that 2 years in, we're already getting a little complacent and sort of traditional, 2 years of tradition of we're going to use Zoom, that's it, or we're going to use Teams. So it's neat to kind of keep a little bit of innovation still going now that it's not forced upon us. Like the start of this, you had to innovate, or you just didn't have anything, I guess. So people had to innovate. So now what's going to drive us to innovate? For us, it looks like it's this famous hybrid thing, because we're talking about going back to the office. Okay, well, how would we now bring our executives in if 3 are their houses, but the other 4 are on-prem? How do we mix that? How do we still send them something back? And so the other piece that we've been doing, we've got another sister team at LinkedIn that just focus on video conferencing. And so they run the tools like Zoom and BlueJeans and Teams, and all the hardware that's throughout LinkedIn. So again, working with those teams to use those, what were video conference tools as production tools. So again, our sphere of influence and our sort of ability to hit resources both within the company and externally has grown so much that we suddenly get a lot more ideas, a lot more concepts coming in. So that's been exhausting, but also very, very good.
And you said the magic word, which is innovate. That is obviously where we are pushing. We push that NDI protocol to the moon. We do everything we can. We keep doing that. And that bridge is that going to be that new Maverick workflow, man. I think you got to touch this thing. It's a free download. But I came to New Tech 6 years ago before NDI, like right as NDI was becoming a thing. Literally my first meeting, I flew into San Antonio speaking about flying and the costs. And I heard the NDI pitch and it blew my mind. I was someone who'd been doing productions, a lot of variety of events and almost all live, almost all streaming. And I listened to this piece of technology. I said, wow, this is going to be cool. And yesterday we sort of made the dream reality, which is you can turn 2 remote facilities into local NDIs. And I think when you say innovate, that's where I'm at. I look at the streaming tech and I say, not enough people are pushing the boundary, but to your credit about just outlining, like, you know, you, Melissa, we had to get here first. Like there's a whole rough period where it was all questions. Like we have some technologies, but we haven't really used them enough. Does the C-levels team appreciate it? You know, does it meet their needs? What are they looking for? And that has been interesting. And now if you're in that space of innovation and you were thinking about how can I push things further, the tools are actively being pushed out there. There is more opportunity to do cooler, slicker things. In one of our calls, Dan, I talked to you about how we're tackling these sort of hybrid environments for corporate, where you do have a couple of people on site. Well, you can make NDI points on site. There's a lot of ways to do that. You can run a program, or you can just have a box, right? So now you can plug some device into a box. And now that, you know, that person's at their desk, but we can also grab the person on the Zoom call and we can intermix those people. And now we can sort of have a little level of control. That's like really basic rudimentary stuff from an NDI perspective, but I think that's a step forward. How can we distribute these signals? I think that's important. But finally realizing like the big piece is like, how do we innovate? How do we, like, if we look at metrics, get a little deep in the data analysis, if we look at metrics on our company meetings, right? I'm sure not everybody's attending every meeting, whether mandate or not. Right? You get, we go through this even on this call, right? You get the email from the org, but then you also get the email from the person you're working with on your segment. And then maybe that's the right Teams link. Oh, wait, is that the Zoom link for the pre-show or the actual show? What's going to happen? And you know, I consider myself a smart enough technical guy, but it's easy to get tripped up. Anyway, it could happen to anybody. So you're right to point out there's tons of seams to go off of and make new improvements on. I think that those technologies, I mean, Zoom was a video conferencing platform, arguably competed most with Skype when it came out. Like that's what its goal was. And, you know, the world has stretched this thing to balloon up into this massive platform. Same with Teams. Interestingly enough, we saw that Teams adapted NDI and we're seeing Zoom is like working on plans for doing that stuff. I think all of these guys care a lot more than I would have thought. Like in pre-pandemic times, I don't think Microsoft was necessarily, they're pushing towards this Teams perspective, but it was more about that whole 365, like want everything on the subscription, you know, work with us in all these places. But now this new environment is introducing cool new pieces of technology. I'm excited because I look at the new players in this space. Like there are new players defining what was once largely just considered like, I guess, social media, like streaming was just social media kind of in a way. Right. Now that's not the case. That's not the case anymore. And I really dig all that. So I look at what we're doing and I also look at what the people who play in that same IP space, you know, the word competitor doesn't really exist anymore in the IP world. It's like, these guys are innovating and we're innovating. How do we converge? In a very real way, you talked about a marketing person. My girlfriend does live event planning, and she had to do a virtual event, and they were using an NDI partner. They were using vMix in that scenario. My girlfriend came to a meeting and was listening to people talk about NDI, and she was like, "Wait, what? Like the new tech thing? Like my boyfriend does that. But she, like, that's a reality for her. Now she has to plan virtual events. And so I had this interesting moment coming back, converging, like in my background, I was like, those guys could probably use a TriCaster. But taking my sales hat off, I was just so happy to see, like, here's a normal person at home who's now, they never had to worry about this stuff, and now they're experiencing it. And she had her own sort of like, nervousness. I was like, you're going to be fine. Like, this is going to work better than you think. And hopefully in going through this process, you're going to learn a new angle, because she's been in events, in-person events forever. Right now, she's in Hawaii doing an event for a company. Like, that's been her big deal. But she loves to level things up and push the envelope. How do you make things more interesting? And so when she saw the platforms, she wants to take it to that next level. She looks at the rooms and the breakouts. It's like, this is cool, but like, how do we make those interactions better? And I love hearing that from her, because that's what I'm thinking about. Like, that's what I'm looking at and saying, like, here we have this giant chat log on the side here, and we also have the Q&As, and we can point people to this, and we can speak these languages, but how can we make that interactivity a little bit quicker? Like, could Zoom just pop the questions up on the bottom until we've answered them from a visual perspective? So that way the viewer at home and us are both sort of seeing this common question. We can highlight them. Little things that we do in productions. The lower third is still valuable. It's that language that people can understand. We use it in sports, we use it in broadcast. So like, those little things are there. And then what can we as new tech, the final piece is like, we are both trying to position the IP space and say, hey, this is the way we want it to go. And at the same time, listening to the IP space and saying, okay, this is a big request. And I think in the, bridges that, but also in the near future, you're going to see updates into our products that also reflect that. We are very much reacting with the environment and trying to steer the environment at both times. We're trying to say, this is where we need IP to go so that we can all have these awesome experiences. And at the same time, oh, you guys need support for this platform. Okay, we're going to incorporate it in.
One of our challenges that we're having with hybrid is not necessarily, we talked in the pre-call how live streaming has kind of always been hybrid, right? People are consuming that content from home, from their mobile devices, where have you. And for us as a firm, I'm curious about, what new tech is doing on a much smaller scale, right? Just a meeting. I just need to meet with people, and I might be in the office with 3 people and you all might be virtual. The work that Andy and I started to do this week, and what keeps coming up for us is just that visual equality, right? If I'm in a room, am I a single tile on Zoom or Teams, and you're looking at the entire room? I look this big. I've spent, our practitioners, all of us have spent the last 2 years having such incredible eye-to-eye contact with each other, being able to be, visually clued into your emotional response and body language response to our conversation. How do I keep that connection as people return to work? And, the work that Zoom is doing with Smart Gallery and what Teams is trying to do, I think those are steps in the right direction, but those are the software answers to the question. I wonder where the technology is going to catch up as well, and how, to your point, there's no competitors anymore. How are we partnering to get that equality of space in a hybrid environment? So those are some of the questions we're trying to answer.
Okay, that's great stuff. We have about 10 minutes, well, a little bit less than 10 minutes left now. A big part of this session was supposed to be about the distribution of the content. So from my experience, when everybody went home and people started watching the events at home, there was a few months of a lot of challenges of, why is this not working? I had one client that had their people, they didn't have laptops, so they all went home and they're like, how do we get into our machine? So they remote desktop from their personal laptop into their machine on site, and then went out and watched the streaming events from there, and that did not work real well. So, but after a couple months, and everybody, the firewall team enabled the VPN split tunneling, and people worked through that. I think most of those challenges were solved. But now, a lot of the enterprise networks have undergone quite a big transition during this, and I am personally concerned that when people get back into the office, when you all of a sudden have 10,000 people watching a live event, that those people all were at one point at their house. Now they're back in an office environment. A lot of people are not supporting multicast anymore. They maybe disabled their eCDN capabilities. Is there a concern among you about what's going to happen on the basically like the headquarters network when people start coming back into the office? Because I've seen that starting to become a problem already, and that's even with very limited number of people returning. Dan, do you have any thoughts on that? I know you're pretty heavily into that at LinkedIn.
Yeah, I'm just so used to raising my hand in my Teams calls that I do it on Zoom now too. Yes, so we were lucky enough. We have had a couple different vendors provide us with eCDN over the years. We still have our current solution through Teams using Hive in the background, but there are the occasional times where I'll wake up, at 3 in the morning and think, is that still working? Is that still turned on? I'll shoot off an email to Chris. You can attest that he gets the email and he's like, yeah, it's still there. It's being deployed on everybody's machine. We're all good. When we get back to it, we're lucky at LinkedIn. We have a very strong and robust internal network already, but we didn't used to. That was my first job when I came in at LinkedIn, was to figure out, I didn't even know what an eCDN was, don't tell them that, but I was used to external unicast streaming. That was what we did. That's all I worried about. And we were tasked to figure out, hey, how do you distribute to folks internal? Because at the time they were using a video conferencing system, and all these streams, it wasn't even the network bandwidth, it was just the workload on the servers at the time that were all on-prem to be secure. Right. That was taking everything out. So we're lucky. We still have our eCDN. We still have a robust network, but we are seeing, we looked at a number of different streaming platforms, and there's a few different ways. You would know better than I what the few different ways are. You talk about multicast. We have, like I said, Hive. There's people doing like sort of WebRTC sharing. I forget what they call that. So there are other tools out there, but the time to think about that is now or 3 months ago, because you got a lot of work to do to get on board with the IT team if you haven't done it before. I would think you get buy-in quicker now. We were lucky because our team is within the engineering group, so our IT team is people we know and we can connect, but that's not always an automatic. So the time to think about that, even though it doesn't maybe feel like it, is now, to go figure out what's going to happen. Because if a third of your people come back and they're all used to watching video, that's what they're going to want to do. And that's if your network isn't there or your infrastructure isn't there, they're going to suffer, and you're going to be scrambling to solve for it. So if you're waking up at 3 in the morning thinking about that, take some action, get the buy-in from the rest of the groups and leadership, because it is coming. It is a thing.
Yeah, and some of us lived through that have been around long enough to have lived through that in the early 2000s, and it's not a good situation when the webcast, the CEO broadcast does not work. And one of the things that I've noticed also is that the Zoom webinar platform is fantastic, and it works incredibly well, and much like the meeting service. But one thing to note is that when you do a webinar, it is a one-to-one connection. There's no eCDN capability that you can deploy with that. Now, there's a number of providers out there that are trying to figure out ways to optimize that, like take the Zoom stream and then turn it into a multicast. But those are things I think a lot of people may not be aware of. They're like, well, the Zoom it's been working when everybody's at home, but will it work well when there's 10,000 people trying to connect from an office? And all those, you can take the output stream and send it to a traditional streaming provider, but then you've sort of lost why am I using Zoom? Why would I just not use the streaming provider? So yeah. There's those kind of considerations as well. So we have a couple minutes here. I just wanted to give all the panelists the opportunity to just kind of give some final thoughts for the future, anything you want to touch on. I think we answered a good amount of the questions, but we can get back to them, like Eric said, offline if we didn't.
I'll hop in here. Oh.
Or go ahead, Chris.
So I'm very optimistic about the future. I sit in a place where I'm watching a group develop a technology that is very much impacting that. So that is always interesting to be on have my finger on the pulse of like, where are these things being influenced and how things are being pushed forward, and what's moving technology forward and what is sort of catching up in the technology space. Our company was largely based in the broadcast industry, and the last year it's been a corporate organization working with new tech. The last year of our business has largely been focused there. Different needs. I'm looking at, like, on our product line, really simple things like our visual presentation was based upon what video engineers thought video switching was, right? So that's a solid, stable base, but we now have an influx of new customers. How do we just change the way they engage with the product? Because they're not used to this massive switchboard and having to route all these connections and all these really granular things that on the engineering side that you just have to know. Their experience is now what we're doing right now. So what does that interface look like? Can it be like a touch more human? And I think we have a lot of interactions with organizations where it's just, this is amazing. Do I need to get that big panel? Like, do I need to use that to use the system? It's like, no, we can do this all virtualized. Like, you can run the system in your facility, but have access to it remotely. Your production team doesn't have to show up. As long as someone can turn the lights on in the facility, all of your cameras can be automated. All of those actions that you care about, the audio feeds, the ability to talk with everybody, we can do that in IP. So, that is the cool factor. And then how do we now make it so that, as always with new tech, it is not just the ultra high smart people. It is also church volunteers, middle schoolers, parents at home, doctors, people who have never touched this technology. Well, how do we make that little piece a little easier for them? I think that'll be like some of the major shifts we're going to see, is that it'll continue to lower down in skill level necessity to operate.
Mm-hmm. Great. Melissa?
I'm hopeful as well. I've been around a number of conversations in the last few weeks where people are referring to hybrid as a bubble. It's going to burst soon. People are going to return to work. People are going to start traveling again. I'd prefer to see this as more of a balloon that maybe is just slowly kind of deflating, but will always have some sort of remnants of, being around. Because like I said, I don't want hybrid to go away. I do want people to still have the flexibility, not only for their well-being, but for the environment, to not travel as much and not spend so much time and still bring value to the work that they provide the firm. So I'm very hopeful for the future.
I, of course, am eternally pessimistic. I think it's all, that's why you have me on the panel, to offset these two optimists. No, I mean, one thing to think about, right, is this conversation and even the work that we do, we find we get very tied into like North America and US. Globally, in certain areas of the world, nowhere near getting back in. We've got a different situation here. So, and because a lot of our work is global and a lot of our talent are global, yes, I do think there'll always be that element. And we're going to have, whether we have 4 shows a year that need it or 104, we still have to have the technology there. So we're going to have to be ready for the full gamut now. We don't, we have a much broader scope now to cover. So we have to remain experts in all the things that we talked about, whether it's remote or on site. And we're probably going to have to dust off and remember where to put a camera for a stage and all those other elements too. So, we're going to have that shock when we get back and have to mix the two together. So yeah, I am optimistic that now that we have a much larger set of skills and abilities, that we can make now even more things happen. So.
All right, well, thanks to all the panelists. I'm going to hand it back to Eric here. Eric, thank you for having me, and thought this was a great session. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for all the audience and the great questions.
That was a terrific session. Thanks so much, everyone. We've got more to come later today about hybrid events, talking a little bit more about the do's and don'ts of hybrid events and some philosophical questions behind hybrid versus virtual versus in person and what that future is going to look like. So I hope you can join us later today. I'd like to thank again our panelists and moderator, of course, our sponsors, Conviva, Limelight Network, Signient, Video Guys, and New Tech. Our Amazon gift card winner is Rachel McGee. Rachel, keep your eyes out for an email from us next week. And join us again in about 30 minutes when we talk about OTT and redefining the user experience. Hope to see you then.
Thank you.
Cheers all.
In this era of streaming video, we are pioneers, helping make your stories more vibrant. Conviva lives in billions of apps on devices all over the world, measuring trillions of data points each day to provide real-time insights for your content, ads, and social. Conviva. Every stream, every screen, every second.
Videoguys.com is your source for live production gear, and we can help you start streaming today.
Reach a wider audience and tell your story using equipment like the RGB Link Mini family of 4 HDMI mixers, YOLO Live YOLO Box all-in-one touchscreen mixers, streamers, and recorders, and PTZ cameras and controllers, perfect for productions of all sizes without a large production crew.
Go to Videoguys.com or call us at 800-323-2325 for help and start streaming today.